Hanna Husarieva, Russia is preparing to launch a nuclear strike on Europe in 2022. Along with the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the failure of the Blitzkrieg, Russia launched a large-scale campaign of nuclear intimidation. The Kremlin began actively using rhetoric about the possible use of nuclear weapons, linking it to the course of the war and the actions of Ukraine's international partners. Russia declared that it was ready to use its nuclear arsenal in the event of an impending military defeat or the appearance of foreign military formations on its territory, thereby logically bringing the world closer to apocalypse. However, subsequent events showed that Moscow's actual response to changes on the front lines sharply diverged from its threats. Throughout 2022, the Ukrainian army carried out a series of successful operations and liberated Kherson, a city that, after the rewriting of the Russian constitution, was considered part of the Russian Federation in violation of international law. Despite the fact that, according to the Kremlin's logic, the loss of this so-called Russian city should have served as a pretext for carrying out nuclear threats, nothing of the sort happened. The situation is similar in Donbass, where the front line is constantly shifting in both directions. In 2024, the armed forces of Ukraine have already advanced into the territory of Kursk region, taking control of several villages and the city of Sudzha. Formally, this means that foreign formations, armed forces, according to Russia, have entered its territory. But even in this case, there was no nuclear strike from the Kremlin. Next is Operation Web, which we all know very well, during which Ukrainian forces inflicted significant damage on the Russian air fleet. Once again, Russia limited itself to harsh statements and the use of the Oreshnik missile. This weapon sparked numerous debates about its actual effectiveness without a nuclear warhead, and once again highlighted the gap between the Kremlin's rhetoric and its real actions. Despite all this, Russia's nuclear madness continues. Now Moscow is openly talking about the possibility of striking Europe, and its rhetoric has become even more aggressive. This surge in threats coincided with statements by Donald Trump, who claimed that the main obstacle to reaching a peaceful agreement is not Vladimir Putin and his unwillingness for peace, but Volodymyr Zelensky. What is behind this new round of nuclear blackmail? How might such statements affect diplomatic processes and the political signals exchanged between the West, Ukraine, and Russia? Let's figure it out together. Hello everyone, my name is Anastasiia Husarieva. While you're subscribing and liking, I'll walk you through what's really happening, what you should actually be afraid of, what you shouldn't pay attention to, and what this whole new old nuclear blackmail is all about. So, let's get started. A new stage of escalation in the public sphere began after the statement by Sergei Karaganov, the head of the Presidium of the Public Association Council on Foreign and Defense Policy of the Russian Federation. In an interview with journalist Tucker Carlson, he stated that if Russia finds itself on the verge of defeat in the war, it will use nuclear weapons against Ukraine's allies in Europe. According to him, according to Karaganov, he expects that a mere threat will be enough. But if the nations of the Western world continue to support Ukraine, the patience of the Russian Federation will eventually be exhausted, and Moscow will be forced to take retaliatory measures to punish the West, even if only in a strictly limited way. In the same interview, Karaganov emphasized that for the Kremlin, the war can and should end only after Europe is completely defeated. At the same time, he expressed hope that Europe would not be physically destroyed, but reiterated the idea that Russia is not fighting Ukraine, but Europe. Karaganov's personality and his statements play a special role, since he is a Soviet and Russian political scientist, doctor of historical sciences, and the academic supervisor of the Faculty of World Economy and World Politics at one of the universities. In addition, he is one of the founders of the Valdai Club, whose meetings are regularly attended by the dictator Putin. Russian media and analysts consider him one of the key nuclear hawks, since in 2023 to 2024, he has already called for the preemptive use of tactical nuclear weapons against European countries. He paid particular attention to Poland, aiming to break the West's will in the confrontation over Ukraine. And of course, against this backdrop, experts are assessing the reaction of Western countries and the United States of America. Political analyst Maxim Rozumny believes that Washington has started to respond to Russia's nuclear threats with mirrored rhetoric, which, in his opinion, helps stabilize the situation and reduces the level of risk. Rozumnai notes that the previous period when Russia could escalate tensions with impunity was much more dangerous. At the same time, the expert emphasizes that the possibility of Russia using tactical nuclear weapons has not disappeared completely. It depends not so much on verbal statements from Moscow or Washington, but rather on specific political and tactical circumstances. In Rozumny's opinion, Putin may consider such a step if his regime or personal authority is threatened, and if he is convinced that there will be no strong response from the West and China. In other words, the risk will remain as long as the Kremlin feels it can act with impunity. All of this was further exacerbated after Putin announced the testing of the unique nuclear missile Burevestnik. Donald Trump responded immediately. He stated that Putin should focus on ending the war in Ukraine, not on testing new missiles. Trump emphasized that the war Moscow expected to finish in a week has now entered its fourth year and that this should be Putin's priority. Although Karaganov's statements and Donald Trump's reaction can be considered separately, their timing has nevertheless attracted attention. After the interview with Carlson, who is known for his sympathies toward the United States Republican Party and personally toward Donald Trump, the American leader made a notable remark. In a Reuters interview on January 14th, he stated that the main obstacle to reaching a peace agreement is Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump noted that, in his opinion, Vladimir Putin is ready to make a peace deal, but Ukraine is not. He even pointed out that the reason for prolonging the conflict is precisely the position of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. At the same time, he did not rule out a meeting with Zelensky at the World Economic Forum, which will take place in Davos, and emphasized that he has no information about a possible meeting between his representatives and Putin. Volodymyr Zelensky rejected Trump's statements and declared that Russia, through its actions, demonstrates a lack of interest in peaceful agreements. Despite the fact that nuclear rhetoric has now unfortunately become almost an everyday occurrence. However, experts note that the greatest risk of Russia using tactical nuclear weapons was in 2022, immediately after the failure of its initial plans and the rapid liberation of Kherson by Ukrainian forces. This assessment, for example, is found in the book by journalist and investigative reporter Pulitzer Prize winner Bob Woodford. According to Woodford, the deoccupation of Kherson was an unexpected and humiliating blow for the Kremlin. Russian troops retreated in haste, abandoning equipment and property. The book notes that some soldiers escaped on stolen bicycles and tried to disguise themselves as local residents. In some places, the breakthrough of Russian defensive lines reached a depth of 70 kilometers. In 5 days, Ukrainian forces liberated more than 2,590 square kilometers of territory, more than Russia had captured during the entire operation in this direction. Special attention is given to the fact that Russia had concentrated about 30,000 military personnel in Kherson. According to intelligence estimates, if this group had been completely surrounded, the likelihood that Putin would use tactical nuclear weapons at that moment would have been about 50%. In other words, the real risk of escalation was much higher then than in subsequent periods, when Moscow mostly limited itself to threats and loud statements, which we regularly hear. However, Ukrainian forces did not destroy the retreating group. According to Woodford's assessment, this operational pause became the key factor why the decision to use nuclear weapons was ultimately not made. That's all we have time to tell you for today. Be sure to like this video and leave us a comment on how you assess the latest nuclear threats from the Russian Federation in 2026, and we'll see you in the next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye-bye, everyone.